It's hard to believe that it is already Labor Day weekend. Traditionally, the end of summer, the beginning of the school year, and according to my news feed, a time for fantastic sales on everything. Growing up in one of those northern states that began the school year like clockwork on the Tuesday after Labor Day, it was always a bittersweet time for me. After 3 months of playing with my friends from sunup to sundown, I would switch to spending my days with my school friends. That's what Labor Day meant to me, the transition from one day to the next, one part of my life to another. My family was never one to have Labor Day picnics, or if we did, I don't remember. I didn't stop to think about why my dad was home or what the holiday was about. But like always, when I volunteered to speak about Labor Day, I began doing research, reading, collecting quotes. I learned so much, gained a better understanding, and was able to relate it all to the world I live in. So let's go back to the 1800s and the height of the Industrial Revolution. Rather than being made by craftsmen in small shops, goods could now be made more quickly and more profitably in factories. Factories could be operational 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. People began moving from self-sustaining rural communities to the large urban centers, a massive internal migration of workers. This quickly became a dismal chapter in America's labor history, as described this way in an article by the History Channel. In the late 1800s, at the height of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, the average American worker worked 12-hour days, 7-day weeks in order to eke out a basic living. Despite restrictions in some states, children as young as 5 or 6 toiled in mills, factories, and mines across the country, earning a fraction of their adult counterparts' wages. People of all ages, particularly the very poor and the recent immigrants, often faced extremely unsafe working conditions with insufficient access to fresh air, sanitary facilities, and breaks. It's not surprising that as cities grew, the demand for goods grew, and the opportunity for profit also grew. Conditions deteriorated. Also not surprising was that the workers grew frustrated and began protesting. The National Today website describes the Noti Haymarket affair. On May 4th, 1886, at a time when most American laborers worked 18 or even 20 hours a day, tens of thousands of workers protested in cities all across the United States to demand an 8-hour workday. Police in Chicago attacked both those peaceful protests and a workers' planning meeting 2 days later, randomly beating and shooting at the planning group and killing 6. When outraged Chicagoans attended an initially peaceful protest the next evening in Haymarket Square, police advanced on the crowd again. Someone who was never identified exploded a bomb that killed a police officer, leading police to open fire on protesters and provoke violence that led to the death of about a dozen workers and police. Eerily familiar. Change a few words and it's seemingly a description of a current event that could have happened in Minneapolis or Seattle or Kenosha. So as manufacturing increasingly replaced agriculture as a manner of American employment, labor unions, which at first appeared in the late 18th century, grew more prominent and vocal. They began organizing strikes and rallies to protest poor conditions and compel employers to renegotiate hours and pay. On the UUA website, I found this writing, Putting the Labor Back in Labor Day, by David Breeden, the grandson of a sharecropper. And so 3 generations after arriving in this nation, the family was starving in a 2-room shack. My father was one of 13 children. Of that group, 3 eventually escaped poverty. How did these 3 escape? My father was able to join a labor union, and 2 of my aunts married men who were able to join labor unions. The rest of those children died in the poverty they had been born into. I think about the mathematics of my family, and I can't help questioning the line about this being the land of opportunity. It seems, at least for poor people, more like a land of random chance, except for the unions. He goes on to explain that although his father had a job, a pension, a paycheck if he wasn't on strike, they were still poor. More poignantly, he shares this on his mother's working conditions during the same time period. Well, it wasn't that great. We still had to count potatoes to make sure we could eat all week. But unlike when both of my parents were kids, I never went hungry. That was the golden age of American labor. Yet sometimes we forget that those unions were mostly Euro-American male institutions. For the most part, those unions addressed one American disease, the oppression of working class Euro-American males. Racism and sexism had to wait. My mother worked in a factory the same years that my father did, a shirt factory, non-union. All the bosses were men, all the workers women. My mother, too, theoretically worked 8 hours a day, but she worked on a quota system. She had to sew 12 dozen shirts a day. It was an assembly line. She sewed collars, 12 dozen a day. That pace meant no lunch break, no water breaks, and restroom breaks only under the direst of circumstances. And the only time those women got to rest on company pay was when they sewed their hands into the machines. And sometimes that happened fairly often, given the fatigue of the workers. My mother got no overtime pay, no health benefits, no pension. My mother lived today in constant pain, barely able to walk due to damage to her vertebrae from her job. She gets no disability payment. And the company that perpetrated those crimes has now moved operations to Burma, where a military regime can guarantee that no unionizing will take place. And yet another and another generation of women will end up just like my mom. You might say, thank goodness that doesn't happen today. But he goes on to tell about Steve Jones, who parks cars at 3 different hotels, but still lives in poverty. And Marcelo Reyes, who cleans rooms in a very expensive hotel in Chicago for $9.95 an hour. Her shift is 8 hours, but she must clean 18 rooms during that time. So obviously, Labor Day is not about some long ago occurrence that sparked the collective conscience and fixed all the ills of the working person. How do we then take action to make a change? Again, I defer to the thoughts of David Breeden. The most effective anti-poverty program this nation has ever had is the labor unions. Pay Ms. Reyes and Mr. Jones a fair wage, and they won't be poor, and neither will their kids. And maybe their kids can get an education. This is a way to sow the seeds of worth and dignity. This is the way of justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Unions are one of the few hopes for the poor working people in the United States and the world. My father's job was portable. It's gone. My mother's job was portable. It's gone. Corporations are citizens of the world. People live in nation states. But some jobs are not portable. We have work to do right here at home. 80% of the jobs in North America today are service sector jobs. These are jobs that have never been unionized. But guess what? Steve Jones' job can't be moved to Burma. Marcel Reyes' job can't be moved to China. Hotels with their fancy mattresses and 4-star restaurants with their napkins to fold, these can't be moved. We can fight here for the worth and dignity of every person. We can fight for justice, equity, and compassion. 37 million working Americans live in poverty. Poor people stop being poor when they get a fair wage. Inherent worth and dignity, equity. Reflect on this. In the United States today, the average Euro-American has a net worth of $80,000. The average Hispano-American has a net worth of $8,000. That's a whole decimal point less. The average Afro-American has a net worth of $6,000. We can complete Dr. King's work on the racial injustice issue by fighting the other two evils. Poverty and war are issues of equity. Dorothy Day knew that when she worked with the poor, she was entertaining angels. The Dalai Lama had said, dangerous consequences will follow when politicians and rulers forget moral principles. Whether we believe in God or karma, ethics is the foundation of every religion. And so our politicians have forgotten moral principles. And so dangerous consequences are following. And so the principles of Unitarian Universalism call us to action. Take action. Join UUFHC, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, and get information about the Wage Justice Initiative. Join UUJEC, Unitarian Universalists for a Just Economic Community, and learn more about what justice and equity can mean in action. Donate to the work of United Here. March with striking workers. When you stay in a hotel, ask the management, is the staff unionized? And when the minimum wage bill comes back to Congress, insist a raise in the minimum wage. We have a message for this nation, for this world. the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Now, when I think of Labor Day, it's not just a day off, but rather a time to be thankful for the job I do have. It's a reminder that the work is not done and that the journey is still long. In 1967, Martin Luther King started this speech. 3 major evils: the evil of racism, the evil of poverty, the evil of war, and these are the 3 things I want to deal with today. He ended that same speech. For those of you who are telling me to keep my mouth shut, I can't do that. I'm against segregation at lunch counters, and I'm not going to segregate my moral concerns. And we must know on some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? And vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there are times when you must take a stand that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but you must do it because it is right. May it ever be so.